Welcome back to Strange Exiles, a podcast about ideas, identity, and ideology. I'm your host, Bram E. Gieben. There's a lot happening at Strange Exiles at the moment. Crisis Masculinity, my ongoing series about male identity under capitalism, is well underway now. Got a few essays up on the blog. This month, I also featured a guest essay by Jason Miles of This Is Revolution. There are a few more of those on the way, so make sure you signed up for those. And if you want to financially support the project, you can find all the details on Substack. Today, however, we're back with another Strange Exiles guest and another fellow traveler in the realms of Substack. Neil Scott is a photographer, writer, and designer who's written for the Glasgow Bell, Recess Space, Outside Left, Crumble Magazine, and many other places. His Substack is called The Crop, and it combines Neil's photography with interviews, essays, and philosophical digressions, which I've really enjoyed over the last few months of following him online, some of which we will talk about today. He is also, it's fair to say, a bit of a culture vulture, often to be found at arts events, book launches, and other assorted happenings all across Scotland and beyond. So without further ado, let's welcome Neil to the show. How are you doing, Neil?
I'm good. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. It's the reason I was really happy to do this interview is because it's very rare we get a chance to really reflect back on what we've been doing. We're always looking forward, and it's been a nice opportunity to think, well, what actually do I do? What am I? Can I do a capsule kind of summary of my life? But you've done an admirable job, I think, and I wouldn't disagree with any of that.
Yes, I think it's fair to say, you're a bit of a Renaissance man. You try your hand at various different kind of creative outlets. We actually met through the Glasgow Substack meetup group, which you kind of helped organize. And that was an amazing, I remember the first one of those. We got together it was during the summer. We all got together in the kind of courtyard of a brewery in Glasgow. And I met so many interesting people that day. The day still sticks in my memory. I think there was one gentleman who wrote a blog pretty much exclusively about Wittgenstein, and so I spoke to him, and he was like, "Yeah, my blog's about Wittgenstein. You probably don't want to hear about that." I was like, "Yes, I do. Tell me everything." So it was like a whole collection of people who, I guess, usually when they're asked about what they do, kind of are used to giving a quite abbreviated answer in case people say, well, that's quite random and out there. But everybody there was like, yes, I want to know more about what you write about and how you approach it. So yeah, it was a really cool day. And I think it's good as well, that we've taken this Substack thing and brought it into the real world a little bit. So yeah, no, brilliant to have you on the show.
Just one thing before you carry on. I think that question of Substack is, whether people can be interested in Substack. Can we be interested in a platform? Is quite interesting. A year ago, 2 years ago, even writing a Substack was quite a niche thing to do. Now is kind of Charlie XCX and all manner of pop stars, Rosalia, all these people have suddenly joined Substack. It's become something maybe a bit different, and that was a beautiful day. But yeah, maybe we can talk about this a bit later. But the idea of is this our niche? Just weirdos who still write and I don't know, do podcasts, but yeah.
Yeah, gosh, we could probably spend the whole hour talking about the ways in which Substack's changed and what it was for and what it is for now. I definitely don't like seeing brands pop up on it. I'm not too comfortable with the idea of legacy media all having a Substack. But weirdly, the posts so far by Charlie XCX and people like Jamila Jamal have been very good and really interesting. So I think in a way, just because you are some famous, megastar doesn't mean that your Substack's going to necessarily be boring. But at the same time, it is harder to find those, niche guys who just write about Wittgenstein now. So it has changed a lot. But no, your Substack's interesting for a number of reasons. One is that it's quite visually driven. Photographer, I guess, is right at the top of your resume, and it's what you post about elsewhere as well. So I'm really interested to hear like the story of how you got into doing photography, writing essays. So yeah, let's start with the photography. When did that journey begin for you? Like, when did you get your first camera, and what were the first subjects that you were initially like drawn towards?
So my first experience of photography was probably like a lot of people my age, which is like cheap cameras, 35mm, and you'd take maybe 2 rolls of film a year, take them into on holiday, take them into Boots, and then half the images would come back with little stickers telling you that you've got to focus and have better light and all this stuff. I don't even know if those stickers are even in the cultural memory. I looked up online to see if I could find some examples of them. No one seemed to know about them. So uh, never was interested in photography as a child. But then what liberated everything was the early digital cameras. So we got a little Fuji camera in about 2003. And suddenly, you could just experiment without any cost. You could just try things out. And at the time, I was living in London, and I was making this little magazine. So I was already interested in publishing in websites. And I would go out and just pursue my obsessions. And those obsessions would be like psychogeography. So I'd be, going to Hawksmoor churches, like, Alan Moore talks about in From Hell. And, I'd be I see some pylons in the distance. I think, like, how far do these pylons go? And go on some like epic walk and just take photos of pylons. So it's quite indulgent in some ways, uh, and after that initial kind of experimental period, where I was writing this little magazine, the life probably changed on February the 29th, 2004, when my girlfriend proposed to me. And I realized that to be a good husband, I probably needed to give up these kind of idle pursuits and get a job. So we moved to Glasgow, and I got a job as a full-time web designer. So I was actually earning like a proper wage, working 9 to 5. Anyway, like, fast forward, to lockdown, and I'd spent all this time doing work for other people, as a kind of designer, doing client services. And lockdown happened. Someone told me that Shakespeare had written King Lear during a plague year. And I thought, oh yeah, like, I wonder like what would be my King Lear in this like little opportunity. And so I started a daily photo blog, which, because we know we know that actually photography is like the easiest creative pursuit for anyone to take up. A chimpanzee, or what is it, monkey? There's a famous shot of a monkey that did an amazing selfie. And I realized that I could probably be a monkey and make some photos. But so I did that, and I guess I guess my attitude to that and to all of the kind of subsequent writing was like, well, it's just an experiment. It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to learn something. Can I learn something every day? And I think that's quite a long answer, but that gives you a sense of how I got into photography. And subsequent to that, so I did the daily photo blog for a couple of years, and it originally came with some captions, and I would write about my thoughts for the day, and that was unsustainable daily. But around 2022, I thought, right, I'm going to do a weekly blog. Let's take the same experimental attitude to photography, to writing, and just every week, every Saturday, I'll publish something. Doesn't matter if it's good, doesn't matter if it's perfect, like, as long as it's comes out on a Saturday morning. And I did it for a year, and then I did it for another year. And at some point, if you're experimenting with something, like, you realize, well, actually, I've got to formalize this. I've got to, you can't, you've got to try and think, well, I can't just do it for myself all the time. Maybe there is an audience there. And uh, in 2024, so 2 years after doing the weekly blog, I was like, well, how does it change it if I do it as on one subject? Like, we're all told we need to find our niche. And actually, it was just incredible. Like, suddenly, readership went way up, subscribers went way up, um, and engagement went way up. And you realize, actually, like, doing random things is fun, and it can lead to good lessons learned. But I think at some point you do need to kind of refine that into an offering that is legible to the world. I don't know if you find the same with um, Strange Exiles. It's like you've honed that down into quite a tight kind of offering.
I think it's a bit weird for me because, like, the point of Strange Exiles has always been about speaking to people from all sorts of, like, disciplines and walks of life. So I'm not sure if I've done that laser focus there, but it is what people tell you. If you find there's a lot of writing about how to write on Substack, and they all talk about this idea of the offering, like, focus down, give your audience value. I have a friend of mine who's trying to join Substack at the moment, and he comes from a background of retailing high-end hi-fi systems. So his first few posts, they're all about what you need to consider when you're going to buy hi-fi. And I'm reading this and just thinking, well, this is way more useful than what I do. Like, people are going to love this. So yeah, I'm not sure if I've found my niche yet. But no, that's interesting. You mentioned psychogeography, and I think that's a really interesting point as well about that point at which photography went from being something that you needed like a really good understanding of the kit to do, where you needed to either develop the negatives yourself or take them into a lab for processing. And that it was completely revolutionized by those early digital cameras. And it kind of lends itself to psychogeography. And that kind of actually makes sense of some of your work. It's almost like you use photography as a way of navigating the world. Like, you find something interesting in your frame, and then you move outwards from there. You took some very dramatic photos of, I think it was a celebration after a Celtic game last year. And it was just like the faces in the crowd and this mixture of kind of joy and a little bit of aggression and danger. And, I think you've got the photojournalist's eye for capturing events as they happen on the ground or exploring the geography of places. So it sounds like that kind of like emerged naturally from taking photos on your digital camera and wanting to see where the imagery led you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, there's debates in photography about, can digital really be seen as what they call like indexical, which is, I think, it's quite a pretentious way of like saying like the photograph captures some form of reality. And the idea is that, digital isn't kind of turning light into chemicals as old star photography did, but it turns like light into, well, yeah, like various algorithms and pixels. But for me, I've never, and I'm totally lazy. I never do any photoshopping really. Maybe a little bit on the phone or tiny bit on the computer, but like I have no interest in like converting it into like some kind of art transformation. I'm interested in like capturing what was happening right then and trying to convey what it means in a wider sense. So just using photography as a way of accessing other conversations. And so before I called my blog The Crop, it was called Total Integration, which was again a kind of like psychological idea that I was like bringing all these disparate experiences I had and integrating them in such a way as they made sense to myself at least. And I think that's what photography is. It's we live in quite confusing times, and we live in a kind of era where, we are so, uh, to come back to that Celtic example, like we very rarely live in the moment, like it's quite hard to take photos, street photography these days, and find people absorbed in what they're doing because we're all slightly playing for the camera. And I feel like those Celtic celebrations were like one of the very few times. I mean, people were drunk, that helped, but one of the very few times that people were totally like absorbed in their kind of moment rather than, just being slightly kind of self-conscious. So yeah, I'm very attracted to those moments of unself-consciousness as someone who is very self-conscious.
No, I think it's really great. I mean, you bring, I guess, like a documentarian's approach to things like street photography, but you also, make sure that you're out and about covering things that are happening in the art scene in Scotland. Sort of seen a few literary events and book launches, and I know you
Including
go out to,
yours,
including mine. Thank you for coming along to that.
front row
But
of Bram's book launch.
yes, I think we have the photos to prove it as well. But yeah, so that's one of the things that I guess is your beat as a photographer is literary and arts events. So is that part of the Crop's mission? And yeah, you mentioned the name change. Why did you decide to change it to the Crop?
I think it came back to that idea that you're going to focus in on one offering that is legible to others. I mean, uh, I actually like got a library card at the Glasgow School of Art Library. It costs £40 a year, and every week I would go in on a Sunday, pull down a stack of photo books, and just see what emerged, like what thoughts emerged and how I could connect it to the wider culture. And I wrote a kind of weekly essay in kind of alphabetical order from like Diane Arbus to a Chinese photographer whose surname begins with Z. Uh, did all these photographers as a way of teaching myself the history of photography. I think that's one of the beauties of writing a blog in general. It's like using it as a way of teaching yourself, like rather than coming from the perspective of an expert, to come from a beginner's mind. And Mike Soden, who is, a fellow Glasgow Substacker who has like 35,000 subscribers or whatever, like that's his attitude. You always feel he's got that joy of learning. So that's where it came from. But in terms of going to cultural events and documenting cultural events, I was very, very struck by Brian Eno's idea of genius, which is this idea that genius is not like a result of some individual, coming up with things from scratch. It actually emerges out of a creative scene where, there's lots of cultural activity, there's lots of people doing things. So Brian Eno gives the example of like Dada, emerged from, Zurich, or Berlin, or Glasgow in the 90s, came up with some very, pioneering conceptual art. So all this happened, and I thought, well, maybe I can use photography and my platform, whatever, to try and make connections between people and things, and just to try and to show that there's interesting things happening, and we can connect with other people and meet up with other people, and share ideas. What is culture there for but to kind of bring people together and to share ideas. So yeah, and even at your book launch, you meet a few people there, they connect you onto something else. And I think there is a sense, especially with the latest AI models, that the internet is gone. We've lost the internet. It's just going to be slop all the way down. We'll never be able to believe another image, and so all we'll have left is the people in front of us, the physical reality. and maybe some kind of trusted cultural figures that, you know, we've followed their work long enough to know that they're not just going to inflict slop on us,
Mhm.
and yeah, are prepared to kind of condense down what they know into an interesting package. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you think about, as a fan of sci-fi and looking towards the future? What do you think about this, state of the internet? Like, is it gone? Have we lost it now?
I'm very interested in, Cory Doctorow's notion of enshittification, I think is really useful because he's talking about how all these platforms start out being quite useful and then they get choked with adverts and data capture and, increasingly kind of AI slop. So I think he's right about that. And I have my own fears about Substack eventually going that way. Like anything on the internet feels like it's sort of built on sand. Um, it could become enshittified at any moment. And, like we were saying at the top of the show, arguably the influx of celebrity culture into Substack is maybe the first, wave of that. I think, the good thing about Substack and what I like about it is it sort of does feel like going back to early platforms like Blogger and LiveJournal. Like you do just have interesting people plowing their own furrow there and writing. And I guess from a functionality point of view, it does allow you to keep your email list. So technically you could walk away from Substack at any time. So I think, developments like Substack sort of give me hope that we won't be living in the dead internet. There will still be corners of it where people are doing interesting work and writing about interesting things. But I think it is harder and harder to find that stuff. You have to kind of know where to look.
A few
Yeah.
people have been leaving Substack because of their kind of aggressive marketing and the way that, Substack Notes, is not connected to your email list. And, I have 1,000 more followers on Substack Notes, but it never converts into anything. It's just like when you sign up for someone's newsletter, they recommend you. I remember seeing one time you could sign up for someone's newsletter and it would say, right, you could subscribe to these 3 additional ones that they've recommended, which is obviously amazing for growing your audience. But then they say you can also follow these 50 people. It's like this crazy number of people that you're going to read their notes. I don't know. It's all nonsense. So a lot of people have been going to a thing called Ghost
Yeah.
recently, which does away with all the social networking stuff and just leaves you with a newsletter. And I think maybe that's something that we should be promoting, the idea that we can, just get rid of all the video short form. I just hate short form video. I'm just like, I just cannot bear going on Instagram and just being constantly bombarded with clips of Alan Partridge. I fucking love Alan Partridge, but I don't want to see 30-second clips for
Yeah.
3 hours. At least I don't want to. My best self doesn't want to.
Yeah.
My lower self is quite happy to do that for hours, but yeah.
I've come off social media apart from Substack. So I think I'm in a way like hyper fixated on the part of it that is a social network now, just because I'm still addicted to that kind of dopamine loop that social media gives you. And now the only place that I can go and look at stats or retweet people is on Substack itself. So I don't know if it is that healthy. Obviously, as well, a lot of people have left for Ghost because there's the perception that because it's backed by Peter Thiel money, that it's an evil capitalist platform. I mean, I don't think there are many capitalist platforms that aren't evil, and Ghost also has no real moderation, so you're definitely going to find extremist content there as well. So I don't know. I mean, I tend to just, I think over the years have gravitated towards wherever is busy, but now I'm definitely feeling like a lot of that time was maybe wasted. At least when you walk away from your Instagram or from your Twitter, you don't take anything with you. At least if you walked away from Substack, you could take your emails. But maybe you're right, and it will collapse under the weight of its network effects. I'm not too
But
sure.
you're right. You're right. You can walk away with it with the emails, and that's good. I mean, I don't know. Like, I'm still on all the social networks, like all of them. I'm on Mastodon, like that's how like addicted I am to social, to the internet in general. But um, I think with all these platforms, you can't use them as ways of promoting yourself. Like the minute you fall into that, the algorithm will, kill your content and everything. Like you kind of have to play them on their own terms. So if you're on X, probably you have to like write about crime statistics or something, to please Elon Musk's kind of racist obsessions. If you're on Blue Sky, you've just got to kind of complain about Elon Musk. And if like you just got to play the game of it. If you're on Instagram, you've just got to post selfie. There's all these like laws of the platform, and yeah, I don't. Yeah, it can be fun, but it's not terribly healthy, I don't think, to be
I
on
miss
there.
the days of like forums, like forums were very niche, and you would go to a forum because you were into that particular topic. And then within that ecosystem of people who cared about comics or people who cared about science fiction, you would have all of the subtopics. So like, okay, here are the photographers who like science fiction. Here's the philosophy thread. Yeah, I miss stuff like that where we were sort of like slightly more united by our interests. It's
And
it's,
Reddit
it's
doesn't do
harder.
that.
Yeah, I've never been much of a Reddit person. I mean, and the thing is, like, Reddit is a really good place to promote your work, but you can't just show up there and be like, "Hey guys, I've got some new content for you." You have to participate in it, so it's still like a community. But even then, it's so aggregated. I think I liked the era of the internet where it felt like you could find it your way into dark corners where there were like-minded people. I think that's harder to do now.
Yeah, to come back to Charlie XCX and some of the celebrities that have joined in, Substack, there's an interesting idea of like, people aren't actually interested in good content. No one actually cares about. They're interested in personalities, and they're interested in people that already have an interesting life, or they've done something interesting already. They've produced an album, or they've climbed a mountain or something. There's something else that is the interesting thing, and then the content is like downstream of that. And yeah, I do wonder, like people that spend all their time kind of honing tweets that are like that go viral, like it's probably very gratifying in the moment, but I don't think it leads to anything substantial. And yeah,
Yeah,
it's definitely not been a great way for me of promoting the Substack and the work, but
yeah.
um, yeah, can be
But
fun.
one thing I think we've both been doing is like building up a body of work. Where that lives is sort of irrelevant to like the thread that goes through what you're writing, what you're photographing. I mean, one thing I've really admired about your work is that you seem to explore the kind of area about how photography helps us understand and navigate the world. And I find that really fascinating. Like a recent one was about how you approach photographing people experiencing addiction. So when you're writing a piece like this, how do you kind of first of all pick a topic, and then how do you approach researching it?
Well, that follows on very neatly from the previous question, because I originally started writing about phone addiction. So that was something that I was really bothered by in my own life. And because I try and use photography as a way of shining a light on a topic, I thought, well, what are examples of addiction being depicted in photography, and how can I use that to help understand my own addiction? Is phone addiction comparable in any sense to drug addiction? And so, anyway, I did some more research. I read up on it. There's a woman, Anne Marie Ward, in Glasgow, who's very active on calling out the Scottish government on their approach to the kind of drugs crisis. There's a lot of serious work going on in Scotland, but in photography, I found like a Larry Clark book, Tulsa, in the sociology section of the library. And I knew Nan Goldin's work, and she's talked about drug addiction, whether recreationally or prescription drugs. And so, you know, all this stuff's bubbling away. This could be bubbling away for months. At some point, I realized that like it's really glib to connect it to phone addiction. Like, I don't think the two are quite comparable in the same way. There's a guy I met in Glasgow called Aidan Wilson, and you know he spent time just in a drugs den, you know, and he got to the point where he'd been there for so many months, so they trusted him, and they knew he took photos, and they trusted him to take photos of them shooting up and smoking heroin, stuff like that. And so all this stuff's bubbling up, and I think, you know, I've probably got like, I don't know, 50 posts in draft form, in various draft form, 50 ideas. And at some point, you've just got to bite the bullet. There's some inspiration that hits, and you realize, right, okay, let's just get this one done because uh, maybe there's a hook in the news, or maybe there's something that's happened recently that makes you realize, right, the time is right. Maybe people like this one and share it. I don't know, um, but the actual writing, I think, happens in my head. Like I wake up in the morning and I just try and think of an opening sentence or something to hook into all this totally amorphous research. So yeah, I haven't quite, you know, fixed this idea of like how to convert that amorphous research into a tight article. You know, and probably you know this better than anyone, having, you know, writing a book, you know, doing your masculinity stuff. There must be so much stuff, but at some point, you know, you've got to hone it down into something. But I recently saw Paul Schrader, that film director who did like wrote the script of Taxi Driver. Apparently, when he's making a film, he just has like one sheet of A4 with every scene, and that will get edited. And but the idea is that you can contain something on one sheet of A4, and I think a kind of mind map. That's what I aspire towards, something that I can edit down into like a clear view of what I'm trying to say. I mean, yeah, it's not only what I'm trying to say, but like, am I saying anything that hasn't already been said a million times? Like,
Mm,
am I saying anything that AI won't just summarize better than me? You know,
mm.
'cause AI is very good at aggregating loads of knowledge. So yeah, I think I kind of like the idea that AI is pushing us maybe a little bit. Like it's saying, right, we've done all the obvious takes. You know, how can you put a unique spin on it? But yeah.
That's one of the interesting things about speaking to so many creatives for this show is that if you ask them to describe how they arrived at their ideas, or if you ask them about their process, to them it probably seems quite chaotic. But usually the reason I've approached them is because of how cohesive it seems when I'm consuming the essay or the, you know, the project. Um, so maybe we all feel like we kind of write in chaos and like just hope that we publish in clarity. You know, definitely something there about the creative mind. You recently kind of weighed in on another of the I guess like the big topics in photography, which is, can photography capture something of a subject's soul? I find this an endlessly fascinating debate, and I guess it's kind of relevant to the monkey selfie that we talked about earlier. So yeah, where do you stand on this? Can photography capture the subject's soul?
Um, I mean, I don't know what your spiritual background is, but like when I talk about the soul, I'm basically talking about like inbuilt human tendencies, some kind of character, the nature of someone, rather than, you know, necessarily something spiritual. Although, you know, who knows? You know, like there's that book Quiet, Susan Cain, and she talks about how when a baby's born, like it either it either can handle noise or it kind of shies away from noise. And actually like the babies that shy away from noise end up being introverts. So we do have these inbuilt tendencies, and I definitely know with my nephews and things like that, and babies I've seen, that there is definitely a personality you're born with, and you know, I don't know how it's encoded, but um, we can't change every parameter. We're kind of stuck with who we are. But when I wrote about whether photography can capture the soul, I wasn't talking about the subject because I think that's up for debate. Like what you actually capture in a photo, but what you really capture is yourself. Like you reveal what you think about someone, how you take a photo of them, what angle it's at, like whether you shine them in a good light or not, and even more than that, it's like the ones that you choose to share, like how you curate your image. That reveals so much about what you think is important. So you talk about those Celtic photos, that's me trying to, as I say, like be in the moment, finally to be totally present in a situation. So the soul that's revealed is not that of the subject. The soul is that of the person taking the photo, and especially in the sequence of photos. But that, funnily enough, that was one of the first things I actually heard about photography as a child. Like, oh, there are Native Americans that believe that you can steal the soul
Yeah.
when you take a photo. Steal, and I don't know how anthropologically true that is, but again, there are definitely things that a photo does to people's sense of self. So, kind of, I have in my drawer like a photo of myself that my wife took of me where I look quite fat or whatever, like, and I kind of like, it was the first time I'd seen myself in that light. It's like, oh God, that's what I look like. Right. Like I need to go on a diet,
Yeah.
to start going to the gym again. But all those, things like power dynamics in photography and like what you do to, especially in street photography, which has so many ethical issues, especially around consent and the extent to which someone can consent. Like homeless people are on the street, but they can't consent. They're not on the street in the same way that we are if we're not homeless because they're forced to be there. So yeah, I guess yeah, I think the soul that is revealed is the soul of the photographer. Let's just leave it at that.
That's fascinating because it has all those questions about the gaze and how the gaze shapes what it what's in the center of the frame is a fascinating debate. I mean, maybe this links into another of my questions. Then, as a regular attendee of kind of literary and of arts events, what is it that you think draws you to particular writers and artists? And maybe who are some of the key figures you've met along the way that you will go to subsequent events and try and kind of track them down again. Is there a particular I guess alchemy of the subject for you where you're like, yes, okay, this is interesting, I'm going to go check this one out?
Yeah, I don't know. I tend so many different things that like they're probably, I'm quite liberal in what I go to, but I'm always interested in people that do interesting things and have left a mark in some way. I think one of the big revelations of the last few years, and you mentioned Peter Thiel earlier, but his mentor at university was this guy René Girard. And René Girard, a French philosopher who taught in America, who had this idea of mimetic desire, which he kind of explicated through the novels and through anthropology. And the idea is that human beings don't have authentic desires of their own. What they have is the ability to mirror others, and they mirror the ones that seem to have some kind of sense of self that they aspire towards. And I mean, I think that's a fascinating idea. And that was why Peter Thiel invested in Facebook originally. That the idea was that Facebook was the perfect vehicle for mimetic desire. We would see someone in a photo. It's the first social media platform where photography was free. Photos were free to host. Previously, we had to use these like really awkward solutions like Photo Bucket or
Mm.
Flickr, and then take those photos and try and host them on our own website without, having restrictions or hitting some, usage limit. But Facebook was all about photography, and suddenly we could see our friends having interesting lives, doing interesting things, and wearing certain clothes, and then we might aspire to look like that. And I think part of the reason I go to certain events or follow certain writers or would revisit certain writers, because I think they do interesting things that I aspire towards. There's a guy, Jeff Dyer, who wrote a fantastic book about photography, The Ongoing Moment. And I saw him live for the first time this year. He is a big kind of gangly 6'4" guy, and so it's quite hard to fit him within the frame, because I always go front row, front row in life. That's my attitude. Like, try and absorb as much intensity of that person as you possibly can. But he is someone that, yeah, I definitely have some form of mimetic desire for.
So another of the projects that you've kind of launched in the last 12 months or so is there's one called the Z Project. Can you tell us a little bit about this, and how is it different to some of the other sort of photography projects you've had on the go?
Yeah, so for people who don't know, the Golden Z is what the city's marketing board, Glasgow City Marketing Board, used to call the 3 pedestrianised streets, the main shopping streets in Glasgow. So there's Argyle Street, Buchanan Street, Sauchiehall Street, and they were called the Golden Z, 20 years ago. But I don't know if you can still call them golden. Shopping habits mean that people don't go on the high street anymore, and all the department stores have closed. So there's this kind of transition period where people are thinking, well, what are we going to do with these places? They still have the pedestrianized aspect. There's still kind of places to meet, but perhaps they look a bit shabby because there's not the same level of investment. And I'm fortunate in the sense that I live not too far from these, and my gym is at the other end. So I'm doing this walk from one end of the Golden Z to the other. And Glasgow's built on a grid system, so I can take any route that I want. But I thought, well, let's see what happens if I walk the same route again and again and again. Because a lot of the time in photography, we're just searching for novelty. And I was kind of curious what would happen to my photography once all the obvious things had gone. And you're kind of dedicating time to the same time and place, the same place again and again and again. And also, like, what does it mean to do a project? Like, it's very easy in photography to have a meaningless frame that looks interesting. You're like, oh yeah, that's interesting. But the deeper I went into the world of photography, I realized that meaning kind of is cumulative, and that by doing a long-term project with a wider scope, that where one image can provide meaning to another and give context, you know, maybe something bigger than just an interesting image can come, something that's more of a research project. And I had no expectations of what the Z thing was going to be. I was just like, I'm just going to walk this place every day and see what happens and see what thoughts emerge. And you know, it's been good. I mean, we've talked a little bit about amorphousness of projects and writing, and it does feel a little bit amorphous at this stage of the year, because it was supposed to be just for this year, but yeah, there's something will come out of it. I don't know what that thing will be. I'm currently putting together a zine, which, you know, really interesting in terms of how do you select things to go together. And but yeah, I'm very interested to see how people what people get from it. You know, like I don't want to be captured by my audience, but I'm curious what you know, what goes on in people's heads. So yeah, I don't know if that clarifies it at all, or just
It's in,
articulates my own confusion.
I mean, for me, it's interesting because the thing I know you for from Substack is writing about photography, and these photos are largely captionless, so it has that overriding theme of that, it's focused in this golden Z location. I wonder if the themes will emerge when you decide to sort of time limit the project, and I'm really interested to see whether you're inspired to kind of write something that then reflects on all of those social conditions that you were talking about the collapse of the city centre. um, it's certainly fair to say that the central part of Glasgow is looking a bit dilapidated now, whereas suburbs of it that were, I guess, a little bit more run down in the past. Those are the bits that are gentrifying. So the character of Glasgow is really changing, and that seems like a fascinating route into that. So yeah, I'm interested to see what writing emerges from it, from a project that hasn't been writing focused.
Yeah, but you have to decide, like, am I a social historian? You know, like, am I documenting things from facts and figures and, you know, like shopping numbers, or, you know, can the photography tell its own story? And what does that mean? I mean, the biggest development for me has been my sense of photography ethics. So it started off as a street photography project, but I quickly realized that actually, you know, just taking photos of strangers without actually talking to them or engaging with them only takes you so far. And there's a kind of fear and hostility, I think, in a lot of street photography, at least my street photography, maybe not everyone's. But I do think that by breaking out of that fear and being able to approach people and ask them for a portrait, it's kind of allowed me to deal with my own kind of social anxieties and stuff. So um, ultimately, yeah, like it will have to be interesting images, images that have what Roland Barthes called the punctum. You know, like, so Roland Barthes had this idea of the studium and the punctum. The studium's like the setting in which the photograph takes place, but the punctum is like the detail that makes it a compelling image. And that's the thing that I think will sell it as a project, such as the project needs to be sold. But yeah.
Really interested to see how the zine comes out as well. Are you drawing on some of the zine culture in Glasgow to sort of help you make that? Like, have you contacted Glasgow Zine Library or anybody like that? Or are you kind of doing it DIY yourself?
Yeah, I've only been in Glasgow Zine Library once, and that was the event that you organised with
Oh
Theory
yeah, the Theory
Underground,
Underground one, yeah.
which was very nice. But uh, I mean, photography zines have a slightly different culture, and it's like a world into its own thing. It's not really
Mm,
connected with the wider zine culture. Um, for me, you know, like a zine is just like, it's a bit like a Substack in some ways. It's like a way of experimenting without too high costs.
yeah.
And you know, you can do a limited edition zine. I don't know, like maybe book publishing is actually more accessible now. You know, it's print on demand, but a lot of books, like those print on demand books, the texture of them is like quite gross,
Mm.
like it has something quite nice about a proper book that's been lovingly prepared. So yeah, I don't know how you feel about that as a publisher. Like, I mean, I like the quality of the ones I've seen from your press. Like it seems like a nice object to
Mm.
hold. But yeah, what do you think about all these kind of endless, crappy print on demand books?
It's really interesting. I think a lot of it depends on the design, the typesetting, and the quality of the editing. I think all of these three things produce, I guess, the geist of the particular book. Um, like a lot of people I've seen who print through Amazon directly, quite often the cover will be off center because they haven't, allowed for the spine. um, Also, I guess like a lot of small press books that I read aren't particularly well edited. And if you're reading the text and the text has errors in it, I think you start to feel differently about the physical book. So I guess, if Revol have a thing, it's like really, really a lot of attention to detail in the editing and the design. And all credit to Mike, who kind of comes from a traditional publishing background. For being aware of all of the things that are necessary to make a book feel like a good book. But we use a print on demand press as well, like we go through Ingram Spark. But yeah, you can make certain choices about paper quality, about whether you have a gloss cover. I think
Yeah,
all of these things do end up counting quite a lot to how the book feels in your hand and then in your brain. um, but yeah, it is a lot easier there's less of a high bar to publishing. There is a high bar to selling books though. Like I was down in Twickenham for an event this week, and you know came on and talked a little bit about Revol Press and said, we're a small socialist press. Everybody was like, "Oh, it's fantastic. We love socialist presses. We think they're a great thing that should exist." Um, but then we only sold a couple of books, and I think that was, it's a strange disconnect for me when you're sitting in an event and people are paying £8 for a half of craft beer, but they don't have a tenner for you for your book. It's
yeah,
just people don't read that much anymore, and they don't buy books as much as they used to. So it's a tough market to be in, especially if you're a small startup yourself. Um,
constant struggle.
yeah.
But yeah, like, and there's so much activity, there's so much going on. You only have so much money for books. It's quite hard to
Mm,
justify. And when I go to book launches, like a lot of the time, I'm like, look, I love what you're doing, but like I just don't have time for this. But I did go to a cinema this week to see a film called Game, which was
mm.
made for 150 grand, which apparently is like nothing in
That
the
is
in
a
the
drop.
film.
Yeah.
And yeah, everyone did everything for free that could do anything for free. It's actually produced by the guy from Portishead, Jeff
Mm.
Barrow.
Oh,
So
is it the
like
one with the guy from Sleaford Mods in it?
Sleaford Mods guy is
Yeah.
in it, so probably part of the budget was paying for him, but and it's filmed really beautifully and all this. But it's funny that actually they 150 grand for the film and then another 50 grand for marketing, and you think, oh, actually, to actually get it in the cinemas as a total independent, they're not, they haven't got any distributor, they've got to do a bit of marketing, all this stuff, but I guess if a quarter of your money, however little money you have, is not going for marketing, like you're gonna never be able to get it out.
Yeah. It's the audiences are there, but how do you reach them? That's always the question. But I do like the almost like quite ephemeral nature of a zine, in that people will be a little bit more willing to sort of take a punt on it, and it's not like it has to sort of sit there amongst all your other books. Yeah, I'm a big fan of pamphlets and zines and those kinds of things as well. It's a very different beast from a book, in terms of the way people interact with it as well. Brilliant. Well, I'll definitely look forward to checking out the zine. I wanted to ask you about another of your recent essays. You wrote about J.G. Ballard. So, I mean, I was down in London this week, and I always go to the Barbican if I can. It's just such an amazing building within a complex of amazing buildings, this kind of brutalist architecture. And it always puts me in mind of J.G. Ballard. Like there's definitely a Ballardian aesthetic. So you were connecting this in your essay to the Met Gala. So how do ideas from figures like Ballard sort of go towards informing your writing and your photography?
Yeah, I mean, Ballard is like just the great poet of non-judgmentalism for me. Like he's the person that has this kind of glazed view on the world, which accepts it entirely as it is and extrapolates from what it is without trying to improve it. And I think that's actually a more has more integrity than most artists. And I include myself maybe in this a little bit, which is like we want to make the world a better place. We want to improve the world, and so we're going to try and push the good things and try and advocate for like you say, you're running a socialist press, so on some level you want to push forward socialist ideas and make the world a better place. But Ballard is like the opposite of that. He's just like, no, what is happening? I'm just going to describe what is happening, and actually, I think that's probably more. It's going to make better art, I would say, because art doesn't improve the world. No one gives a shit. Like no politician ever looked at a piece of art and thought, "Oh yeah, I must apply those ideas." All you're doing a lot of the time is making middle class people feel good about themselves for not doing anything practical to improve the world. So, if you write a book of theory or whatever, it's like a lottery ticket. I think like Karl Marx wrote this book a bit like a lottery ticket, and it had huge consequences and created revolutions. 99.999% of books won't do that. So you're buying a lottery ticket and maybe you'll start a revolution and there'll be statues of you everywhere. But Ballard, I think, takes a more interesting approach, for me at least, which is that he just describes the world as it is. The Met Gala in 2024, this stupid celebrity kind of fundraiser, they have a theme every year, and their theme in 2024 was a J.G. Ballard short story. And it's just stupid. It's like a weird short story. I don't know, like if anyone read it, but it's a short story about this aristocratic couple that have this magic rose bush where every time they pluck a leaf, the approaching horde get closer. And anyway, like it was like whoever chose it must have done it as a kind of weird satire of like celebrity culture. I'm not really sure if that translated. People just dressed up like rose bushes. So I thought that was like interesting. It was in the culture, but I only really wrote about that because J.G. Ballard had been in the news because Coca-Cola did an advert that was like generated from AI, where they put different writers that mentioned Coca-Cola and then kind of made a kind of video of them typing out the word Coca-Cola and the logo appeared. Anyway, it was done by AI. They mentioned a book that wasn't by J.G. Ballard, which was a collection of interviews called Extreme Metaphors that a chap, I can't remember his name, but this guy had edited. And this guy, who himself was famous 12 years ago for creating a John Ronson bot on Twitter, had suddenly had his own work turned into a bot-like behavior. Anyway, like, so all this stuff happened, and I thought it was a really nice way of connecting idea. Like we talked about the amorphousness of writing and how kind of things get shaped, but there was that, and there was also an exhibition in a gallery in Glasgow called the Common Guild, and that used a Ballardian title for the exhibition, but didn't really give much of a sense that any of the artists had ever read J.G. Ballard. And I think a lot of them were still doing, like I say, they were still trying to make the world a better place. So, yeah, I don't know how you feel about that. Like art as non-propaganda. I don't know if like probably people think J.G. Ballard is like demoralizing in some ways because he's just going to make you feel terrible about the future. But I think that's what art. Well, I should be truthful for him in my estimation.
I think Ballard for me, like, because I'm writing about Philip K. Dick at the moment, and one of my riffs about PKD is that he's never been really adapted very well, but there are many things out there in the world which are brilliantly Phil Dickian. So, the movie Total Recall isn't a particularly good Phil Dick adaptation. It's still a great movie, but it's not very Phil Dickian. But then something like Southland Tales isn't based on PKD, but is a brilliant evocation of his themes. And I think there's something similar with Ballard there. Nobody's really done the perfect Ballard adaptation. I think High Rise came pretty close. But yeah, there's a lot of Ballardian stuff out there in the ether, and that particular mix of very high concept sci-fi stuff, but with a gritty realism. Nobody else really comes close to Ballard.
Yeah. Funnily enough, that film Game that I saw from the Portishead guy is partly based on Concrete Island,
Right.
which is J.G. Ballard's version of Robinson Crusoe, a guy that drives into the central reservation, into the middle of a massive roundabout, and then has to survive amongst the remnants of a thing. Yeah, so I don't know. It probably is quite Ballard. It doesn't quite go in the same direction, Game, but uh, yeah, I just think I think most art is too, is too positive. We need more, yeah, we need more harsh realism sometimes. But in terms of Philip K. Dick, like the one I always think back to is Ubik,
Mm.
which is in no way a realistic novel, but like I don't think captures the entropy of life better.
Yeah.
Nothing else captures entropy better. It's kind of decaying reality
Yeah.
that we're living in. It's like, yeah, reality falling apart. So I think when I'm interested in art or artists, like I guess we're always a bit like it's a self-portrait, isn't it? We're all we're all portraying aspects of ourselves, and for a long time, entropy was yeah, I don't know. I felt entropy in that Dickian way.
Mm. Yeah, no, he's definitely, both Dick and Ballard just get more relevant with each passing year, I think. Uh, but no, that's fascinating. I think like drawing on those influences without necessarily adapting them is maybe like a better way to interact with their ideas. Something that's too strict an adaptation is gonna undermine the point. But I get what you mean as well about like the lack of negativity. I mean, obviously, I wrote a book called The Darkest Timeline, which is about what if our worst fears actually are true, and what possibilities does that open up for us to reimagine a way out of it that we might not previously have considered. But when I was at the Edinburgh Festival last year, there was a big theme of dystopia in a lot of the shows. So the show would be called, sort of like Mega Apocalypse or Dystopia the Musical. And then you would look at the tagline underneath the show title, and it would say how we found hope in, how we found the way out, it was always about like solving the dystopia. Whereas I think, the classic dystopias of Ballard and Dick are inescapable.
Yeah.
They're by their nature not solvable, which is why they endure, I think, as useful
And I
documents.
like in your book where you mentioned John Gray, like John Gray is very good on this, the idea that you don't need like hope as in a big balloon that's inflated with hot air. You just need to be, like his kind of philosopher of Taoism and being and yeah, like, there's a kind of nice sky outside, like what can we do with where we are right now rather than
Yeah.
just fill it up with projections and hope.
Yeah, we don't have to solve everything. The good life persists. This has been a fascinating conversation, man. I feel like we could probably take each of these little sections that we've explored today and go for even longer. I wanted to finish up by asking what advice you might have for aspiring photographers and bloggers now, given what we've talked about, how difficult it is to reach an audience, the changing nature of the technology we use to create and disseminate our writing and our images. What would you give in terms of advice for somebody who kind of wanted to get into writing essays, taking photographs, sharing them? What would be your advice about a route into this now?
It's probably the best results I've had. I've been just trying to experiment, treat it as all as an experiment. So the consequences of doing it are that you learn something, like at the end of publishing it, you might learn something. And like, I think a lot of people fear that the audience or individuals will read your work and be like, oh my God, this guy's an idiot. Like, I'm never going to read anything of his again. Well, probably they won't even read it in the first place. Like, I wouldn't worry too much about that. And maybe, just maybe you'll alienate people. Every time I publish something nowadays, I see this kind of precipitous decline of people unsubscribing, and it's only, maybe 10 people, but like it's slightly demoralizing, but but there's lots of people in the world. It's not like, it's kind of not an endless supply of people, but there might as well be. So I guess, yeah, keep experimenting, keep learning, and you only learn by doing. So hopefully you improve, hopefully you get better, hopefully people, yeah, like hopefully you'll be able to hone what you're doing in such a way without becoming alienated from yourself. But I don't know. I think next year, this time of year, we're in 30th of November right now. We all start looking, or I start thinking about next year. I start thinking like, well, how can I shape this calendar year into something? And yeah, I do want to get back to being a kind of like regular publishing 800 words a week. I think I always like that idea of being a columnist. You check into the Neil Scott column, and hopefully you trust the voice often enough that you'll be able to enjoy what's coming out. But yeah, advice. I think just, I don't know. Yeah, like one thing I've been thinking about recently is this guy Ian Hamilton Finley.
Mm.
Who's this incredible poet, wrote lyric poetry, discovered concrete poetry, uh, and just said, well, the muse has left me. I can't write this kind of poetry anymore. And I actually quite like the idea that what we're given to produce, or what we're given is like in some ways like fated or divine inspiration, or the muse being activated, which is contrary to a lot of advice. People who say, oh, don't wait for inspiration, just keep churning it out. But I think we're deluged by content. Maybe it would be
Mm.
good to wait till you're inspired occasionally.
That's great. Keep experimenting and wait for inspiration. These are great contradictory but complementary pieces of advice. So I love that. That's a great note to finish on. Well, listen, this has been an absolutely brilliant conversation. Our guest today has been Neil Scott. The blog is called The Crop. You'll find it on Substack, and I would highly recommend checking it out. You've got everything in there from, Neil's thoughts on writers like J.G. Ballard or René Girard, all the way down to some really interesting interviews with artists, writers, musicians, other photographers. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you do with 2026 and what you produce. And yeah, hopefully we can meet up IRL again soon, maybe with a bunch of other Substackers. Thank you very much for coming on the show, Neil.
Thank you so much. Nice to talk to you, and see you soon.
See you soon, man.